Hey everyone, Doug here. So about 10 days ago, as of the time I'm recording this video, Blackmagic Design introduced some new studio cameras. They have the new Studio Camera 4K Plus and Studio Camera 4K Pro. These are replacing some of their older cameras that they've had. Uh, Kind of an interesting design, something we've never seen from anybody else before, but nice big touchscreen on the back with the new ones. And the odd thing about these is what I wanted to talk about here today, and that's their choice of lens system. So in the past, their Studio Camera series has used Micro Four Thirds, such as the lens that I've got here in front of me, and they're continuing that with the new models as well. But I find that to be a very interesting choice on their part. There's for a lot of reasons, and that's what I wanted to talk about in this video here today. And go over some of the reasons where I think that going with Micro Four Thirds is probably a big mistake. So when they announced these cameras, my initial reaction was, why are they doing this, especially now when there are probably better things that they could do instead. So my big problem is not with the cameras themselves. I think the cameras themselves are actually pretty nice. A lot of very cool functionality, and then they introduced the new zoom demand and the new focus demand as well, and that's nice to be able to have that kind of functionality in a quality product at the prices they're introducing it. But the problem with this system is their lenses. So, as Grant was doing the presentation, he was demonstrating zooming and focusing using Micro Four Thirds lens. In fact, he used this lens right here, this model. So this is an Olympus 12 to 50, and I'll get into the specs on some of these a little bit here in a bit. He was bragging about how incredibly sharp and how smooth these lenses are. Well, I can tell you, I've had these lenses for several years now, and I can tell you that that's just not the case. These are not great lenses by any stretch of the imagination. This whole series of lenses that have the power zoom capability were introduced to go along with some of the lower end cameras that are part of Micro Four Thirds, and these lenses are primarily for photography. So I'm going to demonstrate here today why these don't make great video lenses, and kind of talk about what Blackmagic maybe should have done instead of continuing with the Micro Four Thirds system. So before we go too far, let's actually take a look at the camera. So this is a completely new form factor. They've never used this before. So their prior studio camera used a 10-inch screen on it, and this new one, it goes to a 7-inch, but they also added touch capability on this. And they gave it their menu system, which I really like. Their menu system for their cameras is actually quite good, and they also use that on like the video assist monitors, and I think it appears in a few other places as well. But it's actually really nice. It's very easy to navigate, very easy to find what you're looking for. So there's a lot to like about that. There's a lot of other cool features in these things, like built-in headset, broadcast style headsets for doing intercom. They're introducing a new way of doing sending video to a truck or your studio control room or whatever by using a 10 gigabit Ethernet, which is new, rather than fiber. Which anybody who watches this channel know I actually really like fiber, but for those who don't want to invest in fiber, you can do Ethernet on that. So that's pretty cool. And then, it's got a set of controls, a set of buttons there on the left, and then there's some knobs on the right for controlling brightness, contrast, focus peaking. So a lot of cool things that would be very, very useful for a professional videographer. But I think where they really fall down is the fact that they're using Micro Four Thirds lenses. So we'll talk about that a little bit. One other thing that I want to mention is that they've really paid attention to one of the big complaints that they've had with their cameras in the past, and that is performance in low light. Traditionally, their cameras have not been great for situations where you don't have a lot of light, by which basically any situation where you don't have lighting brought in specifically for shooting video. But this new camera looks like they've actually finally addressed that. So kudos to them for doing that. Now, it's also very cool that they've produced a reduced feature version for less money, specifically designed for communicating with the ATEM Mini, which is HDMI output only, doesn't have SDI and the Ethernet. So that'll be nice for anybody who actually uses an ATEM Mini. And of course, all your camera control features work on that, just like they do on the bigger one with the SDI and everything. And interestingly, that camera is actually 4K, even though the ATEM Mini does not support 4K. So maybe that tells us that an ATEM Mini 4K is coming at some point. We don't know. But it also gives you the option to record in 4K and still stream in HD. So very cool there. Those recordings are actually in Blackmagic RAW, which gives you the ability to tweak your video image quite a bit in post-production. So very powerful capability there. I think that's pretty awesome that they've done that. So there are a number of things about these cameras that I actually really do like, but the problem is, again, with the lenses. Now, one thing they introduced with this new camera, or a couple of things I should say, they introduced this thing that's called the Blackmagic Focus Demand and the Blackmagic Zoom Demand. Now, these are accessories that you would put on your tripod and plug into your camera to allow you to very easily control focus with very high degree of precision, and to control the zoom as well. Now, this is where things start to get a little strange. Controls like this are very common in professional broadcast. Where you don't find them is with consumer video. And it's interesting that they would pair those with these inexpensive lenses. Now, as far as I can tell, there are actually only 4 lenses in the entire Micro Four Thirds system that have electronic zoom. So, and basically what that means is they've got the Zoom Demand product, and there are only 4 lenses that have been made that it will work with, and one of them has been discontinued. So we have three choices. Let's take a very quick look at some of these. Now, the first one here is Panasonic Lumix GX Vario Power Zoom Lens, 14 to 42 millimeters, which in 35 millimeter terms is roughly equivalent to 28 to 84, which gives you a 3 times zoom range. So not a lot. This is a pancake lens. It's very small, very compact. In fact, it was designed for compact cameras to keep the whole system very, very small. I have one of those, and I'll show you what that is like here in a minute. So that's the first one. And the next one we have is another Panasonic. This is a GX Vario Power Zoom Lens, 45 to 175 millimeters. So I'll just double each of those numbers in order to get your 35 millimeter equivalent. It's an f4 to f5.6 lens. It gives you a 3.9 times zoom. Alright, the next one is from Olympus. This is another 14 to 42. The two lenses are actually pretty similar. It's f3.5 to 5.6. And then the last one is an Olympus 12 to 50 millimeter f3.5 to 6.3, and that's the other one of these that I actually own. And I'm gonna let you see what these lenses actually look like. I'll let you see the images coming out of these. So those are the 4 that are available, or at least have been available. Now, this last Olympus 12 to 50 appears to have been discontinued. I can't find it for sale anywhere. Apparently no longer being sold by Olympus. These lenses, frankly, are not very good. If we take a look at like DxOMark scores on this Panasonic 14 to 42, it gets a sharpness rating of 7 megapixels, which compared to the others is actually pretty good, but still well under the resolution that a 4K camera will get. But if it gets worse though, when you actually go in to look at the measurements on this lens, and you say if you go to the sharpness map, most of the combination of f-stop and focal length gives you closer to 3 megapixels. So that's closer to high definition resolution than 4K. So 4K is about 8 megapixels. High definition 1080p is roughly a little over 2, and then 720p is a little over 1 megapixels. So these lenses might work okay for 1080p in some circumstances, or 720p, but they're certainly not up to the task of 4K. So using these on a 4K camera is not something that I personally would do. Now, things don't get much better when we go look at the 45 to 175. So look at the measurements on that one. They rate that as 7 megapixels, but again, if we look at the map here, this one is definitely better, but it's not great. So yeah, we'll pull up that sharpness map. So it's slightly better, but still not great. So most of the camera range, you're going to be under 3 megapixels. You can get up into the 6 range if you keep your f-stop at around f8 and your zoom at around 135 millimeter. But that's not a very wide range where you're going to get a decent image out of this lens. Now we come over and look at the Olympus 12 to 50. Look at the measurements on that one. DxOMark has not tested the other one, so in terms of the Olympus lenses, this is the only one of the two that they actually have done any testing on. And again, it's a big map of a lot of red, so your resolution there is going to be 3 megapixels or less. We can get up to about 6 if you take it full wide at maximum aperture, but the minute you start to zoom, or stop down on your aperture, the resolution, the sharpness of the lens just decreases quite rapidly. So, alright, I want to start with this. So what you're seeing here on the left side of your screen is my Sony PXWZ-150, and then on the right side of your screen, this is the Micro Studio Camera 4K. This is their older camera, so I don't want anybody to make a comparison here in terms of the amount of noise in the image, or black levels or whatever, because the new sensor is very clearly different. But you should be able to make a judgment on sharpness on the lenses that we're going to be testing. So I actually started with a different lens, not one of the two that we're going to be really looking at here today. This is a Panasonic 25mm. This is actually a pretty good lens. This is an f1.7. I'm not running it quite that far, quite that wide open, and so that I actually can make sure that the focus is decent and not causing a problem as I move around. But I wanted to start with this so you can see that this camera is actually capable of doing a nice sharp image. In fact, let's take a look. Okay, so here you're seeing, this is actually a zoomed cropped image, so this isn't going to be super soft, but it gives you a better look at the detail. And this, what you're looking at here, is the Micro Studio Camera 4K. And if I switch back to, this is the Sony in comparison, and then I'll cut back to the Blackmagic Studio Camera. So you can see that this lens actually is quite sharp. Now, as I switch lenses, we're going to see a lot of that sharpness go away. Alright, this is the Panasonic 14 to 42mm lens, and this shot is a little bit overexposed, and I kind of did that on purpose to sort of illustrate one of my points here. I'm going to go ahead and start zooming, and by the way, this lens only has one zoom speed. But as you zoom in, the image gets considerably darker, and that's kind of a telltale sign of an inexpensive lens. If I go in all the way, it's considerably darker than it was. The other thing I should mention is, like, when it hits the zoom extents, like the very end, you watch and see the image actually jump. So it does a little jump at the end, and then when I zoom back out, it does the same thing. And then if I zoom all the way out, again, it does the exact same thing. So you can see the whole image shakes a little bit as it hits the end. And anytime you start or stop at the widest or the tightest, the most telephoto position of the lens, it will do that weird jump. So, but aside from that, have you noticed that the sharpness on this just is not that great? No matter how much time I spend trying to focus, it's never quite tack sharp. It never looks as good as my Sony. So here is the Panasonic lens zoomed in, and then here is my Sony camera zoomed in. Notice that the Sony is actually a lot sharper. So now I'm going to switch that lens out with the Olympus 12 to 50mm. This is the same model of lens that was used in the Blackmagic demonstration video. Alright, now we're on the Olympus 12 to 50mm lens. This is full wide. This is all the way out at the 12mm position. And I'm going to start to zoom here. This lens actually does have two different zoom speeds, so you got fast and faster. But I'm going to go all the way in. But you notice here that this one has the issue of darkening kind of to an extreme as you zoom all the way in. So in this situation, I actually have the iris opened up all the way. It doesn't go wide. It doesn't open any wider than this. And I have the gain set to +6 in order to get any kind of image whatsoever. Now if I bump the gain here, that's +12. Then I can actually start to see what's going on, but the image actually falls apart quite a bit. At this point, the amount of light coming through the lens is so low that the camera has to drastically compensate with a lot of gain in order to get a semi-usable image. You'll also notice here that this is just not very sharp either. Now here I'm zoomed in so you can see more of the level of detail that's in the image. So yeah, again, this is not a very sharp lens at all. And here I will zoom all the way out so you can see the speed. This is the slow zoom, by the way. So I think this is actually too fast to use in a real live shot, but not fast enough to recompose. So anyway, you can probably tell I'm not a fan of these lenses. Now there are a couple other things about these lenses that I don't really like. Let me point a few of those out. So first of all, neither of these lenses is what we call parfocal, so it does not maintain focus as you zoom in and out. So if you wanted to do a live shot where you're zooming in and out, your subject's going to go out of focus. That's just kind of the way that photography lenses tend to work. Video lenses, professional video lenses, are designed to be parfocal, so as you zoom, you're not going to have issue with that. These also have significant focus breathing, so as you focus, you're going to see the image zoom in and out a little bit. And speaking of focus, The only way to focus on this lens is this little lever that you move back and forth. So not exactly designed for quick focusing. If you did have the Blackmagic focus demand, that wouldn't be an issue. But if you're having to do focusing in any other way, you'd either have to do it through this lever here or through the ATEM software control software, which is even more difficult to do. So not great there. Same thing with zoom. So you just have a lever that you toggle back and forth. Again, just single speed on this. You don't get to choose how fast or slow it zooms in or out. So very restrictive there. And in terms of the 12 to 50, this is a focus by wire. So rather than having just a rocker for focusing, it does have a ring, but that ring has no stops, and the rate of focus changes quite a bit. So if you focus slowly, the lens focuses more slowly. Then as you turn it, the more and more it accelerates the speed. So it's next to impossible to get a reliable focus move out of this if you needed to manually focus. Again, not an issue if you have the focus demand for the studio camera, but for anybody else, trying to manually focus with this lens is essentially next to impossible. In terms of zoom, it has a ring here, but this ring is actually not your traditional zoom ring. It really is it's just like the lever on the other lens. So you turn it and stop in one direction, turn it and stop in the other direction, and it actually only has one speed in each direction when you use it that way. So even though you can get two speeds when you control this remotely, either through the Blackmagic ATEM software control or the zoom demand, either one, you only get one if you actually use the lens body itself. So not great. The bottom line here really is that there are not great lenses in the Micro Four Thirds system for doing live video production. And in addition to these problems, autofocus on this camera we don't think is going to be very great. Blackmagic has traditionally not been very strong in that area, and it's not something that their equipment tends to do very well. So you really need good, strong manual focus, and you're just not going to get that with these lenses. Now there are other lenses in the Micro Four Thirds system that are sharper, that have more smooth focusing, but you're not going to find any other lenses besides the four that we talked about earlier that have electronic zoom. So the zoom demand that Blackmagic has made, as of right now, will only work with those four models of lenses, only 3 of which you can purchase today. So it seems like a very limited choice, very short-sighted choice on their part in order to do this. Now it's entirely possible that they know something that I don't, that there might be some other lenses coming out. However, I feel that's probably not the case. The entire Micro Four Thirds system has kind of been on a downward trend for a number of years now. The cameras are not selling that well, and of all the Micro Four Thirds cameras that are sold, Blackmagic makes up a pretty small portion of those, and so I don't know that they necessarily have enough supporters in the community in order to garner support from a manufacturer to produce new lenses specifically for live video production, because that's really about the only place that electronic zoom makes sense. You're not going to be using it for photography, and you wouldn't be using it for a cinema style workflow either. So anyway, again, very interesting choice. Not the decision I would have made unless they have some information that I don't. So what should they have done instead? Well, realistically, they probably should have gone with a more traditional B4 style mount. So for those who are not familiar with it, B4 is the type of mount that's used on ENG, electronic news gathering cameras. So if you see a news reporter out somewhere, they're going to be using an ENG camera for the most part. It's also used for most everything else in broadcast. So if you go to a sporting event and you find a camera there that's got one of the big box lenses on it, that's going to be a B4 mount as well. So you've got lenses that cover a very, very wide spectrum. And within B4, there are 2 more common sensor sizes, 1/3 inch and 2/3 inch. Sometimes there's some 1/2 inch ones as well. So it's a little bit smaller sensor than Micro Four Thirds, but that's actually a little bit advantageous when you're working in live video. Having a smaller sensor actually gives you a deeper depth of field, so it's easier to obtain critical focus on demand when you've got a subject that's moving around or your camera is moving or whatever. It's a lot easier to get focus when you have a smaller sensor because your depth of field is deeper. So having that bigger Micro Four Thirds sensor compared to the B4 style 1/3, half-inch, or 2/3 sensors is a little bit of a disadvantage unless your camera is specifically designed to handle, camera and lens are specifically designed to handle the demands of live production. Then you're going to run into issues with trying to maintain focus on your subject. So now I think we actually have one clue with the name of these cameras. The camera itself has the word studio right in the name, and I think that tells us a lot about what these cameras are going to be best for. So basically, to me, that means that these cameras really are only going to work well-ish in a studio settings where you've got control over lighting, you've got control over camera position, you've got control over the subjects that you're going to be shooting. So like say for example, a news studio, your subject isn't moving, your cameras don't move much, and when they do, you've got 100% control over that situation. So then that situation, these make a little bit more sense, but I still think the fact that we're dealing with lenses that are very mediocre if you want to have any sort of electronic zoom control is a real disadvantage for this entire product line. So what do you think about these cameras? Did Blackmagic do the right thing by going with Micro Four Thirds, or should they have gone with something else, maybe a B4 mount instead? So also, is this a product that you're considering purchasing? Let me know in the comment section down below, or join the community, the DJP community, over on Discord, djp.li/discord, and we'll have a group, a channel set up there where we can talk about these new Blackmagic Studio cameras and the Micro Four Thirds system. So anyway, thanks everyone for watching, and have a fantastic day.